The screams echoing through the marble corridors of the Forbidden City weren't from childbirth or celebration, but from something far more sinister that history books have carefully omitted for centuries. When 18-year-old Mei Lin first entered the Gilded Gates as a concubine to Emperor Kangxi, she believed she was ascending to paradise, but within hours she discovered she had walked into a living nightmare where beauty was both blessing and curse. The year was 1667, and the Qing dynasty's power stretched across an empire larger than any before it. Young women from across China competed fiercely for the honor of serving in the imperial harem, believing tales of luxury, silk robes, and endless feasts. Mei Lin, daughter of a minor Manchu official, had been selected for her porcelain skin and melodious voice. Her family celebrated for weeks, convinced their daughter would secure their fortune and status. But behind the vermilion walls and golden dragons, a different reality awaited these hopeful girls. The selection process itself was merely the beginning of a systematic dehumanization that would strip away every trace of their former identities. If you're fascinated by the dark secrets of imperial China that mainstream history ignores, make sure to subscribe, because we're about to uncover truths that will completely change how you view ancient Chinese civilization. The moment Mei Lin crossed the threshold into the inner palace, eunuchs seized her belongings and began the transformation ritual. Her given name was erased, replaced with a number and a flower designation. She became Lotus 17, one of hundreds of women who would compete not just for the emperor's attention, but for their very survival. The hierarchy within the concubine system was brutally rigid, with severe punishments for any perceived slight against those of higher rank. New arrivals were subjected to weeks of intensive training that resembled military discipline more than courtly preparation. The daily routine began before dawn, with inspection ceremonies where concubines stood naked while senior eunuchs examined them for any imperfection or sign of illness. Those found wanting were immediately removed, their fate sealed by a simple gesture from the head eunuch's fan. The lucky ones were merely demoted to servant status, but others disappeared entirely into the palace's underground chambers, never to be seen again. Mei Lin quickly learned that survival depended on absolute submission and the ability to become invisible when necessary. The emperor's selection process was particularly degrading. Concubines were paraded like livestock, required to perform various tasks from reciting poetry to displaying their bodies in specific poses. The chosen few would spend a single night in the dragon bed, but even this apparent honor carried its own terrors. Pregnancy was both the ultimate goal and the greatest danger, as rival concubines would resort to poison, witchcraft, or physical violence to eliminate potential threats to their own advancement. Mei Lin witnessed firsthand how the palace's senior concubines wielded power through cruelty. Lady Wu, a favorite of the emperor's father, maintained her position by orchestrating the systematic elimination of younger, more beautiful rivals. Her methods included bribing kitchen staff to add slow-acting toxins to competitors' meals, arranging accidents during garden walks, and spreading rumors about treasonous behavior that would result in immediate execution. The emperor, consumed with matters of state and military campaigns, remained largely oblivious to the bloodbath occurring within his own household. The psychological torture was perhaps even more devastating than the physical dangers. Concubines were encouraged to spy on one another, reporting conversations, friendships, or any behavior that might suggest disloyalty. Trust became impossible when survival depended on betraying those closest to you. Mei Lin watched former friends turn against each other with ruthless efficiency, each hoping their betrayal would earn favor from the palace authorities. Food became a weapon of control, with meals deliberately designed to maintain the concubines at specific weight standards. Those who gained even a pound faced starvation diets, while others were forced to consume bitter herbs that caused painful digestive problems but kept their skin pale and translucent as required by imperial beauty standards. Medical care was virtually non-existent, with palace physicians more concerned about maintaining their own positions than treating the women's ailments. The entertainment demanded of concubines went far beyond singing and dancing. They were expected to participate in elaborate charades that often involved humiliating role-playing, where they might be forced to portray animals, servants, or enemies of the state for the emperor's amusement. Refusal meant immediate punishment, often involving public beatings or confinement in tiny cells beneath the palace grounds. When you think about how these historical injustices connect to modern discussions about women's rights and human dignity, it's clear why understanding these hidden chapters matters. So please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments about how these lessons apply to our world today. The winter of 1669 brought a particularly dark period when plague swept through the servants' quarters. Rather than risk contamination spreading to the imperial family, palace officials made the decision to seal off entire sections where concubines lived, essentially condemning dozens of women to death by starvation and disease. Mei Lin survived only because she had learned to hide food in secret locations throughout her chambers, a skill developed during her months of navigating the palace's cruel hierarchies. The birth of children to concubines created additional layers of horror. Babies were immediately removed from their mothers and given to wet nurses, with the birth mothers having no further contact with their offspring. Male children might eventually rise to positions of power, but daughters of concubines faced an even bleaker future than their mothers, destined to become political pawns in marriage alliances, or to disappear entirely if they posed any threat to the succession. The emperor's death in 1672 triggered a purge that revealed the true expendability of human life within the palace walls. Traditional burial practices demanded that concubines who had never borne children should accompany their master to the afterlife, but the reality was far more brutal than the euphemistic historical accounts suggest. Rather than the peaceful poisoning described in official records, many concubines were buried alive in elaborate ceremonies designed to demonstrate the new emperor's power and decisiveness. Mei Lin's survival through this transition period came at an enormous personal cost. She had learned to suppress every natural human emotion, becoming a hollow shell who could smile while watching others suffer and could betray former allies without hesitation. The woman who had entered the palace with dreams of romance and luxury had been transformed into something barely recognizable as human, shaped by years of systematic brutality into a perfect instrument of the system that had created her. The new emperor, Kangxi's successor, implemented even harsher policies toward the concubine population, viewing them as potential sources of political instability rather than companions or even entertainment. The romantic mythology surrounding imperial concubines completely dissolves when confronted with documentation of mass executions, forced sterilizations, and psychological experiments conducted by palace physicians who treated the women as laboratory subjects rather than human beings. By 1675, Mei Lin had achieved a position of relative safety by becoming one of the system's enforcers, helping to break new arrivals and ensuring their compliance with the increasingly strict regulations governing concubine behavior. Her survival required participating in the same cruelties that had nearly destroyed her, creating a cycle of abuse that perpetuated itself across generations of women who entered the palace gates with hope and dreams. The final revelation of Mei Lin's story came when she discovered that her own family had been paid not once, but continuously throughout her years in the palace, receiving regular payments in exchange for their daughter's suffering. The system had corrupted not just the palace inhabitants, but the entire social structure that fed young women into its machinery of degradation and death. This hidden history of the Qing dynasty's treatment of concubines represents one of history's most successfully concealed human rights catastrophes, with official records deliberately obscuring the true nature of palace life behind romantic imagery and cultural mythology that persists even today. The real story of these women deserves to be told, not to sensationalize their suffering, but to honor their memory and ensure that such systematic dehumanization never again gets disguised as cultural tradition or imperial privilege.